So a couple weeks ago, I got to go to a local gaming convention. It was about an hour and 10 minutes away from where I live, and I got to play a lot of different games there. Usually when I go to this convention, I run some games. But this time, honestly, I looked at the schedule and I thought, there's a bunch of stuff here I want to play, so I'm just going to go as a tourist this year. I'm just going to go and play and have a good time. One of the games that I got to play that I've been looking forward to trying was Star Trek Attack Wing. Now, Star Trek Attack Wing is basically a modified version of Star Wars X-Wing, which is made by Fantasy Flight. Star Trek Attack Wing made by WizKids. So just in case you don't understand what's going on here, Fantasy Flight Games made a Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game and built an engine for it, which is to say how the game plays. These little curved rulers and straight rulers and these little wheels you turn. It's simultaneous movement. Everybody who's playing for every ship picks what their next move is going to be. And then you all do it in secret. You set it down, and then you think, well, maybe he's going to go left, so I'm going to go like this so I can catch him in my sights, and then maybe he goes right. So you don't know. It's kind of a bluffing game. It's strategic. And there's not really a lot of terrain usually, but it's interesting by trying to figure out what your opponent's going to do. In a lot of other games, you know, on their turn, they do their movements and some shooting, and then on your turn, you react to that. In this, you don't know what they're going to do once movement happens. It all kind of happens simultaneously, and that's really the interesting part of this game engine. After X-Wing had been out for a while, the people from WizKids came forward and said, listen, we'd like to pay you to license the game engine and make it for Star Trek, because we have the license to make Star Trek games. So they paid Fantasy Flight. Fantasy Flight said, cool. And now there are 2 games that use this same kind of engine. I currently want to tell you what I think of the differences between the 2. Just a note, understand, this is my opinion. I'm not telling you facts. I'm not telling you that you're wrong if you think other than I do. I'm just explaining this is my opinion. This is how I feel about this game and how I feel about that game and why I make the decision that I make. Just remember that. So, what happened after I got done playing Star Trek Attack Wing at my local convention? I sat down and I thought kind of hard about the experience of what I had done and how it relates to the previous game that I'm already playing, which is Star Wars X-Wing. I'm going to get those mixed up at some point. Just understand that. What are the differences? Well, the game engine itself, the way the game is played, the mechanics, are predominantly the same, obviously, because the Star Trek people, WizKids, licensed the system from Fantasy Flight, the Star Wars people. So, you know, you're still using the little curved rulers, you're still using the wheels, you're still using a lot of the same, you're using cards, you're using predominantly mostly the same stuff. So if they play a good deal alike, and they do, as a person who was playing X-Wing for a while, as the guy was teaching us, well, this is how you play this game, I was able to look at things and go, oh, I know exactly what that does already, or oh, I understand what they're doing there. Or I could say things like, oh, that's interesting, they kind of made a change to this. So there are differences in the engine. When our friends at WizKids changed things, they did add some stuff and they did tweak some things. They did change some of the rules to work actually a good deal differently than the Star Wars rules. But, you know, it's 2 different types of ship battles. It's fighters versus big capital ships. So they're different, and that's part of the issue, which I'll get to in a bit. So here are some differences that I see that were kind of a sticking point to me. Number 1 is scale. The ships in X-Wing are predominantly, for the most part, all to scale to each other. A TIE fighter is the proper scale in relation to an X-Wing, is proper scale to the relation of a Millennium Falcon to Slave One to the, you know, Lambda shuttle. All those different things are in scale to each other, for the most part. I'm not going to get down here with a micrometer and figure out exactly everything perfect, but they're quite close from what I can tell. On the other hand, the Star Trek game is vastly different in scale, which is to say the ships are not to scale at all for the most part. you'll have a ship, just in the Federation alone, I was sitting right by the Federation ships kind of at the demo table, and there was a Reliant class, I think that's the right term, the USS Reliant or whatever, which is a small little runabout, frankly, and it was next to a Galaxy class. Think Picard and Riker and Data and all those guys, the ship they drove around in, Enterprise D. That thing is humongous in comparison. But these two ships were nearly the same size, sitting on the board. And that, to me, it just rubs me the wrong way. The scale thing is a problem for me. Like, I really want the ships to kind of fit to scale with each other, and the Star Trek ships just don't. So, in this situation, I'm going to have to say that's one of the reasons why I prefer the Star Wars X-Wing versus Star Trek Attack Wing. Another big difference between the two, is model quality. I'm a painter. I like to play with models but I like to put them together and paint them generally first. I've always kind of poo-pooed your pre-paints, your HeroClixes, your AT-43s, all those other games that use the kind of pre-painted miniatures. I was never a super big fan. But when I saw the models for this new pre-painted X-Wing game, I looked at them and I said, wow, these are really pretty nice. They've got a lot of detail. There's a lot of, like, the X-Wings have got the little tiny, I don't know, little tracers and conduits and all kinds of stuff going around them, and there's a lot of detail to these models. The TIE fighters and all that kind of stuff, you can get the texture of the big, black panels on the edges. There's a texture in there, everything. They just look really, really good, and the model quality itself is really excellent. So, again, for me, that's another point over to Star Trek. No, Star Wars. I'm going to get those mixed up over and over again. Also, the paint. This is related to the model quality, but the paint jobs are wildly different between the two. For me, that's important again. Even though I'm not painting these, I would like them to look nice. The X-Wing game is very gritty. Everything's got a dark wash on it to some degree, and it looks kind of used. Which, if you watch the movies, that's what everything kind of looks like. Everything looks lived in, looks used. Things look, I don't want to say run down, but, With Star Trek, it looks like the majority of the people who are in the Federation, their job is just to polish ships, both inside and out. And that's always been the case on a TV show. So it would be weird if these ships had, a big dark wash on them to make them look gritty. But even beyond that, the models just don't, the paint just doesn't look as good. I don't know if it's what the issue is. The models themselves, from what I can tell, are from WizKid's previous Star Trek Clicks game. They just took them off of those bases and snapped them onto the new bases that work for the X-Wing engine, those clear square bases that the little cards slip into. But they're basically the same models as the normal HeroClix Star Trek game. The paint quality is just not there. It's just never been there, and because of that, I really prefer the X-Wing paint jobs and the model quality. It's just the way it works. Another difference is factions. So Star Wars, you pretty much got the two factions. You got the good guys, you got the bad guys. At this point, maybe down the road they'll spread it out, but for the most part right now you've got the Rebels and you've got the Imperials. With Star Trek, from what I can tell, I think there are 4 factions, or at least 3 factions in kind of a wild card. I didn't look into it as much as I would have liked, but I was trying to get information, but there's a lot of other people at this demo. There are definitely Federation ships, obviously. There are definitely Klingon ships, obviously. And there are also definitely Romulan ships. As far as I can tell as well, these are also all mostly from the Next Generation or maybe the late movies. There's an Excelsior class, which came from the later Star Trek movies before the Next Generation started, but the majority of the ships all look Next Generation. The Romulan ones are that green kind of swept thing, and the Klingons are kind of that bird of prey looking kind of thing. So, like I said, they come from the late movies to the Next Generation. I didn't see any ships that looked like the original Enterprise, original Romulan bird of prey, stuff like that. But again, I haven't seen all of them. So if you're interested in the faction differences, we've got this many factions for Star Trek and this many factions for Star Wars. If you want more factions, Star Trek is probably the way to go if you want to have basic, simple kind of choices back and forth. I either go good guys or bad guys. Well, then Star Wars is probably your area of interest. Something else that also sort of is a difference in the way these two games are played. The original game system, when it was written for X-Wing, was obviously written for fighters. We're talking about X-Wings, Y-Wings, B-Wings, A-Wings, TIE Fighters, TIE Interceptors, TIE Advanced, TIE Bombers, all these smaller 1- and 2-person ships generally, and they move around on the tabletop as such. They kind of do, you can do tight turns, you can do kind of gentle turns, you can do flips, you know, go out and then turn your ship around to come back towards whoever might be chasing you. It's like you're doing kind of a loop-de-loop sort of a thing. An Immelman, if you're actually flying around in the atmosphere in an airplane. And yeah, that makes sense because they're fighters and you see that kind of stuff in the movies. The problem is that these same actions, for the most part, are also available to ships like Galaxy-class cruisers and giant Klingon craft that can carry 500, you know, Klingon dudes. I'm pretty sure they're mostly dudes. And to my way of thinking, it just doesn't make sense that those ships are so mobile. It's kind of odd. These are big capital ships, yet they're able to do kind of, you know, to do flips and turn around, and that sort of seems a little weird to me. So that was kind of a sticking point for me as I was playing the game. The other thing that's kind of odd is that when you're playing X-Wing, you have red dice and green dice. Your ship, the attack, is the red number. So you might have a 3 for attack, which means you throw 3 red dice when you shoot at somebody. And you might have 2 for defense, which is basically your agility, your ability to dodge. Okay? So when someone's shooting at you, you get to roll green dice in defense, and it's dodging. The TIE Fighters have a tendency to have 2 for attack because they're not as powerful, but they're much more agile, so they have a tendency to have 3 for green dice. The ship that I had when I was playing the Star Trek game had 5 attack dice. It's a huge capital ship. It makes sense. But it had 1 defense die. Most of the ships that I saw on the table had 1 defense die. There was 1, which I think was Reliant. USS Reliant had 2. So it makes sense you shouldn't be able to dodge because you're in this big ship, but yet you can still make all the weird little movements that the fighters can make in the X-Wing game. And to me, that seems like a disconnect. Again, this is all, frankly, very nerdly kind of opinionated nitpicking. No one can really say which game is better or worse. I'm just telling you how I kind of felt when I played now both of them and why I've decided that I prefer X-Wing. Another big important thing, though, you need to keep in mind is that it also depends on what people in your area play. Very few people in my area play Star Trek, which is part of the reason why I didn't even know about it once I started buying into X-Wing. If a lot of people in your area really play a lot of Star Trek, all the local shops, that's all they play is Attack Wing, well, you're probably going to want to get into that if you're interested, because it's probably what you're going to be able to get a game in when you sit down and play at a shop. These games are not compatible with each other, I don't think. I mean, I guess technically you could, or the dice, whatever, but they're really not designed to be compatible with each other. So you can't bring your Star Wars games to the Star Trek battle and see how that goes. It's going to have to be one or the other. So if everybody in your region plays one, you may have to go that direction. Unless you're an instigator and you decide, I'm going to get somebody to switch over to this one because I prefer it. Let's say you hate Star Wars, or you hate Star Trek, or whatever, but everybody in your region plays it. I don't even mean you hate the game, I mean you hate the TV shows or the movies or whatever the deal is. For me, I like both of them, so that was never actually a deciding factor. For me, the deciding factors were this: scale, the model quality, including the paint, the engine, the game design seems like it fits more with fighters than it does with big capital ships, and fourth, that's what everybody in my area plays. So it would be silly for me to sit down and try to switch people over, but if you want to, there's no reason you can't. Maybe you'll get one guy to play with you, and then eventually 2, and then maybe 3, and then it'll grow, and that'll be great. The differences like I said, there are other differences between the two. For example, in Star Trek, your crew cards can actually hop around from ship to ship. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker pilot card, he only flies an X-Wing. He doesn't go in a B-Wing, he doesn't go in an A-Wing, but in the Star Trek game, you have captains and they can go on any Federation ship. Or you've got captains that can go on any Klingon ship, and kind of things like that. There are a lot of different cards. There are more ships, I believe, in the Star Trek game than there are in Star Wars. But these are the reasons that I've mentioned that I prefer the Star Wars game over the Star Trek game. You may feel differently. That's fine. We're both talking about opinions here. Nobody's saying that something is bad or good in and of itself. It's how we perceive it. And I perceive the Star Wars game to be the one that I want to buy a bunch of little plastic spaceships and make laser noises sometimes when no one else is around. Pew, pew, pew.